this was this guy that called in, and he had a Akita Kali mix that he was in a monogamous relationship with, and he wanted to understand why people couldn't appreciate that. And he had taught this dog to have sex with him, with James. And it was odd. And he sort of opened me to a whole world of zoophiliacs.
Bad decisions. Bad decisions. Bad decisions.
Welcome to the Bad Decisions podcast. I'm your host, Scott Nathan. My guest today is Dr. Drew Pinsky. Dr. Drew is one of the most listened to doctors in America. Dr. Drew hosted the nationally syndicated radio show Loveline, where he has taken calls from listeners beginning in 1983. Dr. Drew is a practicing physician who is board certified in internal and addiction medicine, still runs a private practice, is on staff at Huntington Memorial Hospital, and is assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at the Keck USC School of Medicine. Drew has made appearances on The View, The Tonight Show, Good Morning America, Oprah, Ellen, Jimmy Kimmel Live, and now what is I'm sure to be his magnum opus, the Bad Decisions podcast. Dr. Drew, welcome.
This is it. This is the highlight of every career. But I have to qualify a couple things because people get very excited about titles. I was an assistant clinical professor in medicine, psychiatry, and adolescent medicine. I had 3 different assistant clinical professorships. I no longer maintain those, and I'm an emeritus staff member over at the Huntington Hospital. So just
okay,
fair. I don't
fair.
know where that's all coming from, but there we are today.
You have a lot of bios at a lot of places.
My final years, I've had to cut back on some of the stuff.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right. Well, let's jump right in. You and I have known each other a long time, and I've always had a lot of curiosities. There's a saying that Navy SEALs are born, not made. You're one of the most driven people I've ever known. You were class president at Polytechnic High School and on the football team. What was your childhood like? Were you always a super achiever? Were your parents taskmasters, or were you always a self-starter?
Really kinds of interesting question. I strangely woke up thinking about that, I think this morning, this very question about what makes people do extreme, keep working and do lots of things. The answer to your question is a little complicated. Bless her heart, but my mother was emotionally abusive. My father was a perfectionistic narcissist. Nothing I ever did was good enough. I never really got any of the emotional support that children need. That said, I did not solve that problem with overachieving. I just solved it by getting depressed. But I found my way into sports. And sort of the first thing for me was playing high school football at a small high school, but it was still really important to me. I sucked. And going from really barely hanging in to being a pretty good football player was a very important process for me, being able to overcome that kind of adversity. Especially football is kind of a funny sport too. You're putting yourself in harm's way on behalf of your peers. That for a young male is a really important thing. And at the same time, overcoming what seemed like impossible adversity to me. Then around my junior and really in my senior year of high school, I discovered overachieving. I just discovered it. I could now run for class president. I could be in the school of music. I just way overextended myself. And I think kind of got high on it at the time. And that was another moment. And then.
Well, you were obviously a social guy.
Yeah.
So to become class president, so did you manage to transcend various social cliques?
Yeah, I liked leadership and I liked people and it was it was the 70s and leadership wasn't necessarily a cool thing, but I found it interesting and I wanted to do it. And I guess I'd done the class presidency my junior year. And there wasn't a lot of competition, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how to say that I wasn't aware of doing any politicking or maneuvering or persuading or anything, though I must have to some degree. But the important part of it was it got in. Like, oh, this feels good to you, doing lots of work. Because then when I went to college, I got depressed again. This time I got really depressed and I started having panic attacks and I was completely mismanaged and drifted. Didn't want to, it just started out as a pre-med and then went, I don't want to do this. I want to be a musician. I was so lost. I was so lost and found my way back. And when I found my way back, time was short. I had to really apply myself academically, like really, like out of this world. What was before me was almost an impossible task. And I remember another important moment. I remember thinking when I made the decision it was a moment when I made the decision. And I remember it felt like I was looking up at a brick wall that went on for infinity. And I just thought, all right, one brick at a time. I'm just going to climb up this wall. Here I go. I'm just starting right now. That's the way it goes. And
were you in therapy or on medication?
I was
during
in
these
therapy.
collegiate.
So here's, if you really want that story. So I started having panic attacks. I didn't really know what they were. I went down to the school health department and there was no such thing as adolescent medicine then, and I was so mismanaged. One of the things that got me interested in adolescent health was how little there was for adolescents, and this sort of retired family practitioner was manning the clinic, and he looked at me and said, "You need to get your shit together. Go take long walks in the woods or something." And I was like, I've tried everything. I would do that. Something is wrong. Then I knew enough to know that, okay, this is a mental health thing. So I went up to the mental health services, which were at that point were divorced from the medical services. In fact, they were literally in the bell tower. In the bell towers where they kept the mental health services. Wow. And then again was mismanaged and sort of didn't get much stuff and was taking kind of anti-anxiety medicine. I had 3 years of really just misery, maybe 2.5 years. And it got me interested in mental health, got me interested in adolescent health, because I didn't want anybody else to go through what I'd been through. That was for sure. And any event, but to get back to the overachieving thing, I had to turn on the afterburners. And I found when I was getting back to science, I was now a junior in college, my brain could do it. I really don't think the male brain is ready. And for some people, I went off to New England at age 17. I was just barely, I think I turned 18 the day before or something. And I wasn't ready. Just developmentally wasn't ready. And when I came back around at 19, I was ready. I was really ready and went at it.
Why Amherst? Why did you want to cross the country?
Because the choice was Stanford or Amherst. Stanford was not a big deal in those days, believe it or not. And the headmaster of my school went, "That's the best school in the country. That's where you're going." And okay. I'll be damned if they didn't kick the shit out of me academically. And I said ever since, some of my dissatisfaction with just doing one thing at a time, like needing to do lots of different stuff, that's the overachieving meets a high quality liberal arts education. That college got my brain in gear, got me to learn how to think. I've been on a lifelong quest of learning ever since. And it was I just had so much value in what they offered me, what they did for me. And then that whole overachieving thing just stayed with me. I just kept going. I just didn't stop. But it was, I still have it. It's a workaholism. And
I'm always curious about high achieving people's routines. And I was recently talking to Dan Schulman, the CEO of PayPal, or recently retired CEO of PayPal, and he goes to sleep at 8 o'clock. He gets up at 4 a.m. He gets the shit kicked out of him doing Krav Maga by IDF agents, and he's in his 60s. What's your routine? What's a typical day for you, and how do you start it?
Back to the comment about not being satisfied doing one thing. I also like all my days to be very different. So there are certain things I do every day. I insist on doing, but different times, different things, every day is different, and I really like that. For a while there, I was on a pretty rigid schedule of getting up at 5 a.m, doing rounds at the hospital till like 7, seeing medical outpatients till 2, then going to the psychiatric hospital and doing literally my second career, which was initially taking care of the medical services for psychiatric patients at that hospital, and then eventually taking over their addiction services in 1991. And yeah, that was a rigid schedule. On the weekends, on a day off, I would work 8 hours. That went on for years and years and years.
If I can, I'd like to get a little more granular with this. Like, I
Yeah,
really want to know, like,
yeah.
when your eyes open in the morning, how long are
Now,
you in bed? How long are you in bed before you get in the shower? What do you eat?
well, now, I mean, it's very different now. My life is totally different than it used to be. Now, it is, if that's what you want is now, because now it's leisurely compared to what I used to do.
I mean, when
Am,
we met, you were doing, I think, 3 shows a day. You were doing
yeah,
radio, pod, and
yeah.
TV, which is inconceivable.
No, then when it was really, really bad when we first met, so in 2010, that was around 2010, I finally admitted to myself that I was doing television. It wasn't until then that I went, okay, you don't have to keep pushing back and, sort of cramming it into the corners. You're doing all these different shows right now. It's okay. You're doing television. Let's lean into that a little bit. At that point, I had a daytime talk show on CW. I had an evening talk show on HLN. I had Loveline from 10 to midnight, and we were doing Celebrity Rehab. So
Christ.
that was, and I was seeing patients at least one day a week, and dealing with all that. I think I was even at the beginning still even managing the drug unit for a while, but that just got to be too much. And so, yeah, I mean, but then again, each day was different too, but it was tightly. I'm used to scheduling my days in 5-minute intervals, okay? And I still kind of do that. So there's two things that are left over for me from those days. One is everything is in 5-minute intervals, everything. If this show had started 5 minutes late, it would have freaked me out. I would have been like, uh-oh, I'm going to be behind on other stuff I got to do on the other end of this. And I hate texting. I hate it. Because all those years of workaholism, I was tied to a pager. And so when something goes off in my hand or my pocket, I have a bodily reaction. Like my heart rate goes at least to 120. And I have a feeling that I cannot shake. I have to answer it right now. Because back then, if it got through it in a page, it was an emergency. Now, I need you now. Call
Life
now.
and death, yeah.
Call now. And so that is still so deeply, I can't break it. So I hate texting as a result. You'll see me.
You're
a
a fit guy. How much do you work out?
Pretty much every day. I try to work out every day. I've been. People see me doing this thing, V-Shred. I actually follow their program. I've screwed up my shoulders really badly, lifting very heavy weights for many years, and so I have to kind of modify my program. I do a lot of HIIT cardio, but I'm very satisfied with what I'm doing right now. And you asked, so I get up. Sometimes I get up at 6 in the morning. Sometimes I get up at 7:30. Tomorrow I'm going to get up at 5:30, and I'm going to travel. I travel a lot, and that really screws me up. The aging brain and time zones is not a cool thing. It takes me like days sometimes to recover. But travel throws into everything. Like tomorrow morning I'm getting up at 5 o'clock and going to Albuquerque to moderate a panel for RFK Jr. on addiction. And then next weekend, on Thursday, we're going to Canada to speak on a panel to talk about some of the things on mass formation that are going on these days and some of the excesses of COVID. But my usual day includes, I do a streaming show at 3 o'clock that's live. I find a time to work out for an hour and 15. I get up quick. I don't lie in bed. I get up right away, and I have coffee first thing. I love coffee, and I drink it regularly through the morning. I have a podcast I do, sometimes with Corolla, sometimes it's other people, sometimes it's meetings with the wellness. It's just every day is different. But it is a jigsaw puzzle that I love maintaining. I love doing.
But it's always rigid. Let's jump into addiction if we could. In my many years of dealing with 30 years in LA, I've met a lot of addicts and a lot of people in recovery, many of whom we have in common. And you've saved the lives of several friends of mine. I've noticed that a large number, most addiction specialists, professionals I've met, are actually ex-addicts themselves. Being a normie, what attracted you to the recovery space?
So this is another long story. Nothing I've done is an improvisation. There is nothing, there's no blueprint, there was no plan. It was always me going, that interests me. I'll walk into that door and see what's going on. Now, I wouldn't do it half-assed. I really apply myself. But this is another one of those stories. So I was at the time moonlighting at the psychiatric hospital. I was a resident, and then moved into, once I started practice, ended up being in charge of their medical services. So I was dealing with all the medical issues in the psychiatric hospital, and I got very good at the medical care of psychiatric patients, but a lot of the medical problems, guess what, down in the drug unit. I was fascinated to find that there was a discipline around drug withdrawal. You could actually sort of lay out a clinical plan in withdrawal. Although at the county hospitals where I trained, we were treating heroin addicts and alcoholics all day long. The withdrawal process was haphazard, resident specific, just random and wrong. And so I got very good at drug withdrawal, and there was not a lot of people doing that at the time. So I was asked to see more addicts. And somewhere around probably 1988 or 89, I followed a couple of patients through treatment, and they were young people who were dying. One was a cocaine alcohol, the other was a methadone addict. And they ended up like amazing. I was like, what just happened here? Prior to that, I would hang out on the drug treatment unit because I liked the culture, I liked the staff. It was more fun. I don't know, something about it really attracted me. So at nights when I was on call, I'd hang out down there. And I'd always look into the treatment room. There's a glass window between the nursing station and the treatment room. And of course, there's 12 steps on the wall. And I would always think, oh, what is that BS? What's that nonsense they're doing in there? I get them off drugs. I get them off the drugs. I detox them. I'm the one doing the job. I had no idea. Well, I hung around there for a few years, got very good at it, saw some miracles, wanted to learn more, and was eventually asked to be the assistant director of that program. And 6 months later, the director quit. And that was when I had to really step up my training and get a board certification, all that kind of stuff in addiction medicine. And I clung to the job because at the time it was like unheard of for anything other than a psychiatrist to have that job. So I knew it was rare. One of the reasons I was selected to step in was I was politically inert. The psychiatrists were having turf wars and stuff, and they accused people of stealing patients. I don't want any of that. I just wanted to run the unit. And we ended up building a pretty nice little Camelot there. We did good work for a long time, and we could handle the sickest of the sick. And no matter how sick they were, we could handle it. Just ventilator was the only thing we couldn't handle. Could handle everything else, and we had very good outcomes. And it was wonderful because I was always interested in the brain. I think I had some codependency. Well, I definitely had some codependency issues, so it massaged that a little bit. And it was just this wonderful crossroads of everything: medicine, psychiatry, neurobiology, spirituality, family systems, interpersonal relationships, emotional regulation. All of it was there. It was on full display all the time. And it was just so, and we had this wonderful team that we eventually built. It was wonderful. It was so exciting to work with. I mean, it really was, we all kind of worked there because of the team. And we loved working as this particular group. It was really fun. So it wasn't anything about being an addict or codependent for sure, but it was just, I was attracted to the people and the culture, and then the biology really interested me. Now, the interesting thing is, to this day, people always say to me, people in recovery, particularly when I'm dealing with a sick addict or something, they always say, how do you understand this disease so well, not being an addict? And first of all, I can say, not as well as a recovering addict. I have to bring recovering peers in with me in order to do some of the work. The addict will spin me they can manipulate me pretty well. They can get I mean, not always, but I really, to think like an addict is really hard for a normie, right? I can't tell you how many times I came out of a session, I'm like, Bob Forrest, hat and glasses. I go, Bob, she all this Mrs. Smith, whatever. She opened up. First night, she's talking about her mom and the abuse. Oh my God, it was so great. And Bob looks at me and goes, yeah, she wants drugs. And I go, what? I go, no, we're through all that. She's getting into no. She goes, I'm telling you, she sees you. You've got a prescription pad. She wants your drugs. And
I've seen that.
God damn it! 2 hours later, she was at the window freaking out, demanding medication. And I was like, it's hard to think that way as a non-recovery person, as a non-addict. But I've gotten pretty good at it. And with the answer to the question is, how do I understand it so well, is I've been saturated with it. I've been seeing it for decades.
Sure.
And you really have to do that to understand this condition. It's not something, if you're not an addict, you can get by just getting a certification for Suboxone prescribing, God forbid, or even hanging around a unit part-time or treating a couple of people here and there. You have to be submerged in it because it's counterintuitive. and you have to see and feel. You have to start to begin to understand how it makes you feel when things are going certain directions.
All right, I have a two-part question.
Yeah.
Is addiction in fact genetic? And do you think we'll ever figure out how to treat addiction on a genetic level?
So another long answer, Scott. Here we go. So
Let it fly.
So I've treated 10,000 addicts in my career. I can only think of 5 where there wasn't a clear family history. So you tell me, is there a genetic heritage here? And we know what the genes are. We know several of the genes. We've got several. I'm a guy named Mark Shuckett did a famous study, and he found that if you had both the LL allele and the LL allele, the serotonin transporter, and a single amino acid substitution in the GABA A receptor, a proline serine substitution, you had a 100% probability of developing alcoholism, no matter what environment you were raised in. And he did this in a study of sons of alcoholic fathers trying to predict who got alcoholism. Well, when you had one gene, you had about a 60% of getting it. Environment affected it. You had the other gene, yeah, again, the environment, you needed the gene environment, but certain combinations of genes, and you just get it 100%, no matter where you're raised.
Right.
And that's for sure what we see out there. So the genes are there. And the question then was, so would we ever want to adjust those genes somehow? So that conversation started flying around in the 1990s when we started zeroing in on some of the genetic mechanisms for this thing. And by the way, there's several other candidate genes. I just mentioned a couple of them. And let's be clear, a disease is a complex gene-environment interaction that results in an abnormal state of biology that has a particular pattern and a particular response to something we call treatment. That's it. That's what a disease is. And lo and behold, the biology, the abnormal biology that's triggered is, of course, in the brain, and people somehow want to treat that organ differently than other organ systems, but it's the same as any other disease state.
Do you consider ketamine a legitimate treatment?
Sure. For depression, I've seen
not for addiction.
No, I've seen it trigger addicts. No, I don't see where that would. Yes, it's everything. You got to use everything in our arsenal, right? People can be very resistant, have very unique genetics, unique biologies, and we need to help make recovery possible. Not that ketamine will replace recovery, but it will make recovery possible. That's how you have to think about these adjunctive interventions that we do. But I want to get to this gene thing. Okay, so that idea started flying around in the 1990s, right? And I thought, I immediately had a weird visceral reaction to it. I went like, wait a minute, you're talking about like crazy conversations were being had, like we should abort babies with these genetic markers. And I thought, wait a minute, you want to take this genetic phenomenon that has been in the human genome throughout history, you want to expunge it from the human population. And I thought, my next thought was, first of all, you're talking about my patients, you're talking about these people not being here. Then I thought about what a rich population they were, how smart they were, how human they were, how much talent so many of them had. I thought, really, you want to get rid of that? Dylan, and every poet that's ever lived was an alcoholic. Dylan Thomas, Hemingway. You don't want any of these people? This is what you're saying? But I think to your question, they go, well, we just want to adjust the gene, just the one gene. But these genes have consequences all over the place. So you're talking about changing fundamentally who people are that have a rich potential in life and a genetic phenomena that has persisted in the human genome literally across time. So the question then becomes, well, this gene can't be all bad. There must be some evolutionary adaptive advantages to having this gene. And at the time, I happened to watch the movie Braveheart. And they make a big thing out of showing that when 10,000 Scotsmen went into these horrible battles, the 5 or 10 guys that survived, clearly the alcoholics survived. And so I thought, yes, that's my patient. They'll call themselves a million different things, adrenaline junkies, they like these extreme environments. And so I started experimenting, going in, because I give lectures every week to groups of addicts, and I'd say, a bunch of Huns came over the hill with spears. What do you guys want to do? All of them. I'd pick up a chair, I'd run right at it. And I go, you what? As a normie, I'm like, anybody want to run the other way? Anybody? I go, well, how about if a bomb exploded in the parking lot? Oh, I'd go check it out. Really? You wouldn't head... It's so counterintuitive. So, and then I started realizing that, oh yeah, This is when they're at their best. It's the only time their anxiety goes away. They get high from it. They make great shortstops. They make great race car drivers, fighter pilots, extreme athletes. All have this gene. And evidently, not all, I mean, they seem to have this gene, but and evidently in extreme and particularly genocidal sorts of military style assaults, apparently they're more likely to survive. And the evidence for this is, just look at Scotland. They were genocidally assaulted, an isolated population, genocidally assaulted for generations. Alcoholism emerges. Irish, same thing. North American Indians, same thing. Central Europeans, same thing. Whenever you isolate a population and you just generationally kill them off, the ones that survive, the good survivors, seem to have this gene. They're not that they're using.
But we Jews aren't big drinkers.
We what? Oh no, I know. So in fact, it's really interesting. The only time I ever see stimulant or opiate addiction without alcoholism is Ashkenazi Jews. Only population. It's really fascinating. It's really fascinating. And that's probably because we went even, think of the how many generations of genocidal assaults the Ashkenazi Jews have been under. It probably took the gene down even a little further, in terms of its mechanisms. And how it does that, I don't know.
Amazing.
Really interesting, isn't it?
Did you ever see that documentary on Netflix called Of Two Minds? And they were hyper creative people with bipolar disorder.
No, but I know a lot of them.
Well, you helped me with someone I was dating years ago, and you wisely told me to run in the other direction. But she was a brilliant actress who had severe bipolar disorder, would self-medicate with alcohol, wouldn't take her medication, and it was this endless cycle.
Yeah. And be careful too. There's a close relationship between bipolar disorder and borderline personality disorder. They can kind of look the same, and it's complicated. That relationship is very, very complicated. But all that stuff can be very difficult to be in a relationship with.
Yeah, it was very difficult for her because she said that when she knew she wasn't better when she took the medication. She said, but it would put out her creative fire. So then she would get off the medication, and people in this documentary said the same thing. She just said that she just felt numb, and that internal creativity was just doused with water.
Yeah. So people with bipolar typically miss their hypomanias. They don't miss the mania, they miss the hypomania. And you have to kind of parse out what is really numbing and blunting, and we don't want that. That we should be able to do better than that. And what is missing that extreme high of the hypomania.
Okay, back to treatment. What's the efficacy of ayahuasca on trauma and addiction? I tried it once. It was the gates of hell opening for me. If you offered me a steamer trunk full of money to do it again, I would say, no, thank you. And I could use a steamer trunk full of money right now.
About what I see is about a third of people respond positively, a third of people it's a neutral, a third of people it's the worst thing I ever did. That's about my sort of experience of it. And I've only seen one case where it in a sustained manner resolved an addiction. I have seen it routinely help people for about 6 months, and then it comes back. That's been my experience. Whether or not,
so it's like the Tony Robbins of drugs.
Kind of, yeah. It kind of is. I mean, I'm sure there will be some utility, right? But there's a little too much, expectation of magic potions. That things are just going to get better, and that's that.
Yeah.
It doesn't really
okay,
work
let's jump over to some sex stuff, if we could.
All right.
What's the strangest fetish that you've ever encountered in your career, and how did you address it with your patient?
Well, if it were with a patient, I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you
without naming names. But yes,
no, because if it were that strange, they'd be able to identify themselves. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, all right, fair.
But on radio, lots of that stuff, and so I can talk about that. And this was this guy that called in, and he had a Akita Kali mix that he was in a monogamous relationship with, and he wanted to understand why people couldn't appreciate that, and he had taught this dog to have sex with him, with James. And it was odd. And he sort of opened me to a whole world of zoophiliacs. There were starting to be websites and things then, and the only common thread I could find was extreme childhood deprivation, like Romanian orphans type stuff. So that the sort of the valence of a dog and the valence of a human being, about the same. Dogs are a little nicer. More happy to see you when you come home.
Right. Um, Next, another two-parter. Can polyamory or ethical non-monogamy work? And are dating apps like Field, where people lead with their kinks, healthy or destructive?
So there's no absolute. So it's not
Sure.
never or always. Some people can figure stuff out, but I would just say that there are armies of people trying to help two people have a successful, intimate, sustained, satisfying relationship. You bring another person in, and it doesn't get twice as hard. It gets exponentially as hard, and it's essentially impossible. It's just the feelings that emerge are unpredictable. People are always surprised by them, and they eventually kind of make people unhappy, if nothing else. And just look at all the TV shows and things that document these things, and they're all evangelizing how wonderful these things are, and yet it's just really a hard thing to sustain for people. It's just we don't seem to be wired that way. If we were, I'd encourage it.
I agree. I don't think we are either. But the one overarching thing that I always hear from people is I can't get the great sex and the great partner in the same person.
Well, then I feel bad for you, because that's something that you can try for. I mean, certainly you can try to find.
Well, see, it's not me. I've had both, but I hear it a lot from a lot of people. A lot of people.
I wonder, sex and love addiction these days is alive and well. It is really very, very, very common. And I just immediately just kind of wonder what's really going on people's emotional landscapes. Now, does everybody have to be fully actualized emotionally? No, it's none of my business. But it does feel like there's a lot of compartmentalizing and acting out behaviors, and the internet has been a major part of that. And certainly dating apps are, that's the rocket fuel for all that. I remember I talked to a guy who ran a sex addiction program, and he was just like, "Oh my God, these dating apps." So he was mostly dealing with gay men at the time, but he was like, "This is terrible for them, the ones that are trying to get healthy."
Yeah, speaking of dating apps, like my ex's parents were in an arranged marriage. My parents have been together since they're 12 and 13. Do you think choice overload is a hindrance?
Well, there's plenty of studies to show that when humans have more choice, they're less happy. That is for sure. But
Okay.
but I don't know. I don't know when it comes to the interpersonal space. I don't know. I guess you can try to collect the evidence, but the evidence, for or against would have a historical, socio-political, economic context. You know what I mean? How could you study
Sure.
this across time meaningfully? I don't know how you do it. But I do feel that there generally is a spiritual vacuum. There generally is a lot of unhappiness and trauma, and a lot of that is getting acted out. And that's all I heard on Loveline for 35 years. Same damn stuff. Our families have been hurt, have been eviscerated for many, many years now, and that has had an effect on the meeting the needs of childhood, and that has an effect on our adult lives and our probability of using drugs and alcohol, and how we conduct ourselves in our intimate relationships.
Yeah. I speak to a lot of young people on 6 continents on TikTok. And maybe some of it has to do with COVID, and it's anecdotal, but all I hear from young people is their loneliness and isolation due to social media. Where's it going? And do you see any path to socializing in person again? Is there a path out of this?
I hope so. I mean, I think we will one day look at the screen the way we look at tobacco, that it's particularly dangerous for young people, it's dangerous for everybody. Maybe you want to limit it, or certainly the way we look at alcohol. And I do think I've noticed a craving for real life experience, people going to live events, people wanting to be in restaurants together. I just noticed that there's a real hunger for that. And I think that is very healthy, and perhaps that will get us out of some of this.
Yeah. Do you think this is just a throwaway, but
Yeah.
Do you think there's any truth to the type O negative being resistant to COVID? Because I have been exposed to COVID a lot. I've been in a car where 3 people got terribly ill on a drive back from Palm Springs. I have never gotten it despite tons of exposure. Is it my type O negative blood, or is COVID just afraid of catching Scott Nathan?
I think it's some other particular unique Scott Nathan quality. The typo is so common, and we were thinking about that stuff when we were trying to figure everything out, but that did not bear fruit. So, but
All
there
right,
are
so
people,
that's not.
there are people that don't get it. That's for sure. There are people that are
Yeah,
resistant.
I've been in very close proximity to people who got terribly ill in closed cars for hours. I have never gotten it.
Mm.
Knock wood.
It's those ACE inhibitors. You do anything like do nasal lavage 5 times a day or something? You know, anything to reduce your risk? No.
No, little Flonase once in a while.
Mm. Mm.
Let's see. I find it's back to relationships. I find that the vast majority of people confuse pleasure with happiness in relationships and in life. Can you talk about the distinction between raw pheromonal attraction and meaningful partnership?
Yeah. There's many layers to examine there. One is, sort of, I was thinking about this the other day that I had talked to an anthropologist she said, love at first sight is just lust that works out. And I thought,
Right, it's just
interesting.
chemistry.
Yeah. But I, strangely enough, I had a conversation with Florence Henderson's husband. Jan Brady's, not Jan, what was the mom Brady? Mrs. Brady's actual husband in real life. And he was a therapist, and he said something really interesting. He said, people can have these pathologies that, and when people are really attracted to each other, it's usually the worst part of one person with the worst part of the other, the sickest at least, coming together. That's what creates some of the lightning bolts. And then when we're dealing with sex and love addiction, that's the kind of stuff we're teaching people. And he said, those can be good relationships. That intense attraction can be a source of renewal and commitment and and fun, but you have to have process. He said, you got to be doing some therapy or something, because it will not go, it will not last, it will implode. Something will happen.
Do you think relationships need yin and yang? Like, just in my observation of you and Susan, you're a scientist, you're the ultimate pragmatist. And Susan, just from my observation and her shows and the content she creates, appears to be on the new age side.
Oh, for sure. And though she's got a mathematical and analytical mind also, but she certainly is open to a lot of these other things that I find I'm skeptical about, obviously. I only can say I've noticed that does tend to be a good pattern in terms of people getting on. I did have a relationship with someone well before Susan who was like me, and it drove me crazy. I
don't do well with other creatives. I need left-brained business types, doctors. I do well. I only have one working hemisphere of my brain. It's paint splattered all over the ceiling. I need someone who's on their game, who's going, all these things that you've done, all the paint on the ceiling. Let me arrange this into something, sellable.
I get it, and I found it to be just uncomfortable to have somebody who's anxious and workaholic. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't be around it. So I'm sympathetic to other people when if I drive them crazy. But you said pleasure and something else, like, what's real?
Happiness.
Happiness. So happiness is a term that in America in particular, we have lost track of entirely. I don't even think we understand that when somebody mentions the word happiness, I don't think they understand what they're saying, and I don't think it is any way related to what someone else might use when they use that term. So what are we talking about? And people have sort of recognized this, particularly the philosophers have, and so it grew out of Aristotelian philosophy. So Aristotle said, what's the purpose why are humans here? What's the ultimate purpose? What's the ultimate telos? And he decided it was happiness. As we, British and Americans, English, translated the Greek into happiness. Turns out that wasn't the word he was using. He was using a much richer, more complicated word called eudaimonia, which is essentially a flourishing existence, being in the world, contributing, okay? And you have to remember, plenty of major, figures that have contributed have not had hedonic happiness in their life necessarily. Gandhi, Jesus, were these guys happy in the sense Yahoo, the way Americans think about happiness? No. And we ensconce happiness in our rights and privileges in our constitutions and things, and other countries find that odd and weird, and then with that we don't even know, we don't get into the weeds of what we're talking about is so odd, but we get confused between hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. Eudaimonic happiness is sort of a nourishing, satisfying existence that has meaning, and meaning making is one of the great vacuums of our moment, of our time right now. It's when you talk to those young people that feel lonely, I'll tell you, finding meaning is the thing they're having the most difficult thing with. Because if they had meaning, their loneliness would be much more tolerable. And they'd
Isn't hedonic just another word for pleasure, though?
Yeah,
A chocolate chip cookie, a drag of a cigarette, a 15-second orgasm.
Yeah, that's hedonic happiness.
Yeah, that's pleasure. That's not happiness.
It's pleasure and happiness, but it is also very pleasing and pleasurable to have eudaimonic happiness. There's a lot of pleasure in that, but it's a harder road, takes more work. And by the way, with the kind of pleasure you're talking about, as Schopenhauer said, you go from drive, desire, to pleasure, to satisfaction, right back to drive, right back to going after it again. While with eudaimonic happiness, there's a much more settled sense of persistent well-being, pleasure, meaning, all those things that humans are actually looking for. And so I really, when I first was thinking about this years ago, I was thinking, nobody happier than my heroin addicts when they take their first hit, right? But that's not a happy life. So it bleeds into what's a good life, right? For a human being, what's a good life, and what is certain kinds of flourishing happiness as opposed to pleasure happiness. Eudaimonic pleasure, same thing. You're absolutely right. So it's
I've been talking. Go ahead.
I've been talking to people to think about it.
Yeah, I've been talking to a lot of Chinese people and learning a lot of people in mainland China, and having some lively and spirited debate. And while they don't have our freedom, they also don't have drugs and homelessness or urban decay problems or pornography. And the question is, it's just a pie in the sky question. Would a splash of neo-fascism like Singapore improve America? You spit on the sidewalk, you go to jail. You set up a tent on the sidewalk, you go to jail.
I'm not advocating for any of that, but of course it would straighten things out, but at what cost? And it begs the issue, what kind of society do we want to live in? But I do think we've gone way far in a direction that is not just not pleasant, it's harming people. And that's the part that's driving me crazy. It is harming certainly hundreds of thousands of people. And that needs to stop. And it's easy to stop it, by the way. It's not a big deal, but we just can't get out of our own way right now. Yeah, we are weird right now. It's a weird time politically and socially.
Do you think I know you can't get everyone into treatment, but if a Zuckerberg, a Musk, an Ellison, a California billionaire decided to and say, I'm gonna give you $5 billion to build a treatment center out in the Mojave Desert, would that put a dent in the homelessness and drug crisis?
You wouldn't need more than $200 million to cut it in half and save thousands of lives and make life meaningful again for people that are suffering. We have privileged denial and brain diseases in the law. So we are only allowed to treat dementias, and we're not allowed to treat any other brain disorders that are marked by something called anosognosia, which is block in insight. They don't see what's happening to them, and they die. These are progressive illnesses that end in death, and we're not allowed to help them. All we have to do is build beautiful places. People still think that psychiatric treatment facilities are like one flew over the cuckoo's nest or something. They're more like a country club. We need to build some acute facilities, some residential facilities. We need to tell people who are sick, you can't stay here. I got a great place where you come with me. We can help you. And we're going to get you off these drugs. We're going to get you vocational rehab. We're going to get you back to life. And in short order. It's not hard. It's really
all right.
Not that hard.
How many beds would $200 million get you?
Oh, I mean, I don't know the
Just
cost of
ballpark.
building. I know you could run it for $50 million really easily for a long time. I know exactly how to staff and I know exactly what we would do. $200 million seems to me, you'd probably get you 1,000 beds in terms of in terms of the acute and residential and step down facility. You'd only have like 200 or 300 in the acute facility, and you'd have hundreds of various residential type settings
Sure.
outside of that. Yeah,
That's a big dent.
that would be ridiculous. It'd be so. Literally, all you have to do is say, "Come with me. We'll help you." Yeah,
Yeah, I
it
mean,
just
this is couch money for so many people here.
they're spending so much money on maintaining the status quo. We're spending billions, in the current situation, billions to maintain this current situation. There's now an infrastructure to maintain this, and that's how it's going to stay because there's so
This
much
safe
money.
inside seems to be an abject disaster. Am I wrong?
Of course, because listen, I deal with some of the first of all, you're running hospitals without walls, but they're still hospitals, and you're not allowing any doctors or nurses. You're running hospitals with social workers. They're not trained to do this. It is insanity. So, okay, you're running. Imagine if you just put some walls up and you put these 10,000 people in a facility with walls and no doctors, nurses allowed, only social workers allowed in, and people died at 8 a day. That's what's happening right now.
Have you met with Karen Bass or Gavin Newsom about this?
I have been up to Sacramento. I've called them murderers. I've done all kinds of things. I'm tired.
Right.
I get
All right.
accused
All
of
right.
I get accused of wanting to tell people how to live or incarcerate addicts or I don't know what it's so effed up. So the latest thing is some of these social workers then come up to me and goes, yeah, we're having good success with the housing. They were getting them in, and but then we're not done. It turns out it's like it's not over. Yeah, no kidding. It's like these are very, very, very sick people, and you're letting them to deteriorate to the point that they are extremely not only psychiatrically impaired, but medically and neurologically impaired also. But no doctors allowed until they get so sick that they have to have a paramedic pick them up, and then only if they say, "I want help."
Well,
As soon as they
Dr.
say, "I don't want it
Drew,
anymore," you have to let them go, unless they have dementia. Then and if you let them go when they have dementia, you're guilty of abusing the patient. It's crazy.
Dr. Drew, thank you so much for spending time with me. This was illuminating, and I've always admired you, and I really appreciate the talk.
Sure, Scott. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
All right, you too. Cheers.
All right, man. Good times.